Hey guys, welcome back to OrmsTV. Today we have probably one of the most anticipated cameras of the year. And it feels like I said that just a little while ago when Sony brought us the all-new FX30. But this time it's something for the still shooters, and it's the all-new Sony Alpha A7RV. Now the A7R4 was already an absolute stills powerhouse with that 61 megapixel sensor, beautiful autofocus, and some truly phenomenal performance. The A7R5 aims to take that one step further, and Sony's crammed some incredible new technology into this thing, and I'm going to take you guys through all of that. But for now, let's go shoot with this beast. It's like in Jurassic Park. Now with an all-new camera, you're obviously going to expect all new specifications. So the first spec might seem like a bit of a letdown. The A7R5 still has a 61 megapixel CMOS sensor. And you might think, oh, it's the same as what you got in the R4. And yeah, it is. It's exactly the same megapixel count. But that's not all that important really, because 61 megapixels is already plenty of megapixels. You really don't need that much more out of a full frame sensor. What is completely new though is that this sensor is now paired with Sony's BIONZ XR processing chip. Now we've seen that in stuff like the A1, the FX3, the Sony A7S3, the new FX30, and we know that that's a phenomenal processing chip. And the power that this little thing will put out is actually quite phenomenal. And that processing chip ties into another little thing that I'll touch on later when we talk about the autofocus system. But for now, you also have 693 autofocus points within this, and you have a bit more tracking capability. So you have the human and animal, like you've seen in pretty much all Sonys up to this point, but you also now have a dedicated bird autofocus system, so it'll do the whole eye tracking thing. You also have insects, which we're going to test out. Haven't found a suitable insect yet, but we'll get to it. You have planes, trains, cars, motorbikes, pretty much everything. And again, there is a little bit more to this autofocus system, but I will touch on that later. In addition to that, your continuous shooting mode, you'll shoot 10 frames per second if you're shooting in a compressed RAW or JPEG format. And if you're shooting compressed RAW and JPEG together, you'll be able to run off 184 shots before the buffer cuts you off and says no more. If you're shooting an uncompressed RAW, then it slows down a little bit and you're sort of running more at like 6 or 7 frames per second, which is still plenty, because remember, this is not Sony's dedicated sport and wildlife camera. This is very much the working photographer, studio work, landscape, portraiture, that kind of thing. And those are pretty tasty specs. So as the rain's coming down, because you know, Cape Town, if you don't have sort of all seasons in one day, then what are you even doing? We're hiding under a tree here, and I'm going to run you guys quickly through the ports, ergonomics, and some interesting things that Sony did with the screen on this unit. So just to kick it off, the grip, nice and deep. It is still a little bit short for my taste, so in certain scenarios I get the pinky slipping on. But let's be honest, if you are going to be shooting this in a more professional capacity, so you're shooting in studio or fashion or anything like that, you're probably going to put a grip onto this, and then that problem absolutely disappears. So coming around here, you have your dual card slots. On the other side, you have pretty much all of your standard ports you would expect. So microphone input over here, you've got headphone input for monitoring. On here you have your multi-port for all your remote accessories, and of course a USB-C for downloading and for powering the units if you want to shoot continuously. Very handy. And then full-size HDMI, and of course a stereo-like trigger port. Top of the camera, pretty much what you would expect, and very similar to the A1 and even the previous A7R4. So nice and tactile, big dials to work with. Your dial on the end here, of course, can be customized completely and locked out so that he can't turn. Very handy indeed. Everything is nice and tactile. It clicks, it turns, it rotates. The buttons have a nice deep press to them, which I really, really enjoy. And I love seeing this finding its way into more of Sony's current cameras. You have your joystick for going through menus and moving autofocus points around. And of course, all your normal, shortcut keys that you would expect. A big thing on here for me, and it's nice to see it come down from the A7, the A1 actually, not the A7, and that is the 9.4 million dot EVF. And this thing is an absolute beast. You look through this viewfinder, it's incredible, because you're so used to looking through kind of lower resolution viewfinders from other manufacturers. When you do look through this thing, it just reminds you how truly phenomenal that 9.4 million dot viewfinder is. It is incredible. And then something that I didn't think I would enjoy, but I actually really like it, and I can't tell you precisely why, but it's kind of handy. So your screen here, it'll tilt out, as we've seen in the past, tilting, that kind of thing, but at the same time, it will also swivel. So you have a swiveling and tilting screen, and I think Sony calls it a multi-variable angle screen. I guess referring to the fact that it'll do multiple things, but it's just kind of handy to have the extra angles that you can get with this thing. And as I said, I can't tell you exactly why I like it. I just do, it just kind of works. I find myself, the moment that I'm gonna shoot something off the screen instead of through the viewfinder, I instinctively move it away from the camera body, and it just feels natural. I don't have to tilt it out just to get a little bit of separation, a little bit of an angle out of it. I think it's kind of handy, and I would like to see this move into some of their more video orientated products. Other than that though, the ergonomics are perfect. It's bang on point, it's exactly what you expect. It's pretty much classic Sony, and it feels like it'll last forever. This is actually quite incredible. So we've got this worm here making an absolute beeline for it, and one of the new autofocus features is insect detect. Now, nobody else is doing this yet, and I'm sure once Sony has this out, everybody else will sort of try and work it in. But this insect detect thing is actually pretty incredible. And I mean, look at the lens I have on here. It's a 70 to 200 2.8. I'm not even on a macro lens yet, and the footage is absolutely phenomenal. Like, it's really incredible. I wasn't actually expecting it to work. Like, we all know bird and human detect and dogs and cats and all of that thing works absolutely perfectly. But for the first time, actually having it following insects, tracking, and I mean, this thing is tracking absolutely perfectly. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. I know you guys haven't. It's just, this is really impressive technology, and it speaks a bit to the really clever autofocus tech that they've built into, which I'll touch on now. Now, every time so far that I've touched on the autofocus, I said that there is a little bit more, that there's a little bit extra in this camera. And what Sony did here was Sony effectively installed a secondary processing chip in it. So you have your BIONZ XR chip to handle all the image taking, processing, reading information off the sensor, color science, all of that kind of thing. And then what they did was they added a dedicated AI chip to it. And not AI in terms of anything automatic, literally AI as in artificial intelligence. Now, how deep this goes is very difficult to say, and I simply don't have that sort of information. I don't know how much of a artificial intelligence or machine learning algorithm is at play here. But what I can tell you is that where they've implemented this technology, specifically in terms of the autofocus, is something that you absolutely have to behold. Now, up until the point that Sony handed me this camera, if you put a gun to my head and you said, pick a camera with the best autofocus on the market, I would say Canon, and any number of models that was released up to that point. And right now, currently, probably the Canon R3 with the best stills and probably video autofocus on the market, bar none, until this thing came out. And that's huge. That's absolutely massive. So not only has Sony stepped it up with their IBIS, which right now is absolutely the best that you can get as it sits in this camera, the autofocus system is also on a completely different level. The way that this locks on and sticks, the way that it manages to identify subject matter. When you swing this over and you autofocus on humans, it is absolutely on another level. And man, I keep saying it, but it's true. The way that it locks on, the way that it finds eyes in your frame, the way that it knows that a human being is there, whether it's sideways, from the back, full frontal, there is absolutely no doubt in the mind of this camera that what I'm pointing it at is what I want to photograph, and it knows where I want to focus. But I have never experienced autofocus like this. Whether you're pointing it at birds, humans, insects, absolutely anything, there is nothing better on the market right now. And that is a big feather in Sony's cap. That's massive, because it was something where they simply were not quite where the other brands were at. And now they are simply in a league of their own, and everyone else is going to have to catch up to what this camera is capable of. Oh, it is so good. Such a good camera. Now, the last bit of specifications that we need to touch on here is, of course, the video specs. And while this is very much a stills-centric camera, it does still shoot pretty tasty video. So you've got 4K at a maximum frame rate of 60, but that is with a slight crop. So you're looking at about a 1.2 crop factor when you're shooting at 4K 60. If you drop it down to 4K 30 or 4K 25, none of that is present. You'll also be able to shoot 10-bit 422 in that 4K, and of course output it all via the full-size HDMI port, and there you can output at a maximum of 16-bit RAW. And again, that's something that we've seen in other Sony video-centric cameras, but it is nice to see it in this unit over here. Now, due to the megapixel count, this unit is of course capable of shooting 8K, so why wouldn't it? Your 8K is capable at a maximum frame rate of 25, but that is again with that slight crop. So again with the 1.2 times crop factor that you see when you're shooting 4K 60. Everything else over here is pretty standard. You have access to the exact same autofocus capabilities when you are shooting video. So you have all of that advantage that the AI chip brings into that, and your autofocus in video is every bit as sticky as it is in stills. It's incredible. Now, I'm going to show you guys like the video clips. And obviously on the screen of this camera, we can't really see the difference between the 8K and the 4K, but we'll show it to you guys in the video and you can see for yourself if you spot any major differences between it. But the 8K is there, the 4K is there, perfectly usable. All in all, a very capable little video camera as an addition to the obviously very stills focused nature that this unit has. Okay, so right now I'm recording on the A7RV, literally just doing a bit of vlogging. And the thing that I want to talk about here is the in-body stabilization. Now, this is an industry first, and we are looking at 8 stops of in-body stabilization. No one else is giving you that much, and it's pretty phenomenal. And if you look at this footage, I mean, it is buttery smooth. The lens that I'm shooting on does not have OS in at all, and it just absolutely works. It is so incredibly smooth. Like by far the best in-body stabilization that I have ever experienced in any camera. And well done, Sony. This is a significant step up for the industry and a massive step for Sony. So now that we've been shooting with the all-new Sony Alpha A7RV for a couple of days, got a couple of thoughts about it that I think is worth sharing here. And the first thing that comes to mind is the initial disappointment almost at the lack of a bump up in megapixel specs. And the more I've shot with it, the less important that little niggle has become for me. when you're actually out shooting with 61 megapixels, you know, it really doesn't matter. You guys will see from the images that we've put up throughout that the stills quality is absolutely incredible. The dynamic range of the sensor is wonderful. The color that you get out of it is really, really good. And I want to say that I think Sony has been tweaking their color science a little bit, because their skin tones are definitely more accurate than what it has been in some of their previous cameras. So there's definitely been improvements on this sensor. Then you go to the stuff that they've added, the new things. So first off, the IBIS. Having 8 stops in body has been incredible. It's been so good that I didn't even notice it. And what often happens is we'll be out shooting, you have a relatively long lens or even a short lens on your camera, bring it up, you're framing, the moment you halfway press to focus, the camera sort of does that little jiggle and you see the stabilizer kick in and all of a sudden your stuff is locked off. This thing is so good that I haven't even noticed that. And when you really start to pay attention and you notice that IBIS kicking in, you realize just how incredible it actually is. It is bar none the best in-body stabilization system that I have ever used in any camera. It is incredible. And I'll touch on one more part there, where the idea that technology, when it's really good, just kind of gets out of the way and you don't really notice it. And that's what the IBIS system in this feels like, because you don't notice it. It just works every single time and so well. And the second big thing that's been added is this AI chip. And it has exactly the same quality as the IBIS. It just gets out of the way. It just works. You don't even really notice it. But what you do notice is that you don't miss focus. Nothing that you point at is ever out of focus. And that's pretty incredible. My videographer is standing behind the camera now, actually said it earlier. It's like cheating. When you're shooting with this camera, when you're shooting stills, it's 100% like cheating, because it takes all the work that needs to go into getting your focus right just out of the equation. And you can literally just walk past anything, point, shoot, and it's going to be in focus because it's that good. It is auto detect, auto focus with 0 delays. And it is the best autofocus system on the market right now. It really is. And as soon as I get a chance to have one of these in hand again, I am going to take a seriously lengthy lens, 400mm, 600mm, whatever I can get my hands on, and go and do some birding with it. Because even though I'm not a big birder, I know that that is a real test of an autofocus system. And what we've done here today probably doesn't really push it as far as it should be pushed. But it is just so good. And it doesn't interfere, it just stays out of the way. And if this AI chip works the way that I hope it does, and yes, this information will come out once the camera actually gets released. Unfortunately, this is quite a bit of time prior to release. If it learns with you, if it learns the way that you shoot and it adapts a little bit, and becomes better adjusted to how you like to interact with the camera, then this might just be the best camera out there. It's not the best video camera, it's not the best all-round camera, but as an absolute stills shooting monster, you would have to look pretty far to get something better. Yeah, you'll get more resolution out of a medium format system, but try and get this level of technology out of it, not gonna happen. And as a marriage between that technology and the art of photography, this thing stands on its own. Nothing comes close.